October to March, 96.5 hours. That included 2 weekends and 1 overnight trip. So that gives her a little bit over $10 an hour based on the supplement that we're requesting. So again, just informational. I thought that might be helpful as you're trying to determine why is this particular supplement coming forward and why wasn't it included in the spring supplement schedule that was approved last year.
So may I clarify
Yes,
without
ma'am.
interrupting your
No,
stream
that's good.
here?
No, that's good.
So, you indicated that the Booster Club is paying that in full,
Yes, ma'am.
but our board does approve supplements
That is correct.
that we pay, but because this one was not included in the original request that you approved, the Booster Club is gonna have to pick up the cost of this rather than the school district, just as a point of clarification.
And supplements can be paid by the board, meaning discretionary money that's sent to the school, or it can be paid by the Booster Club. So there are some that are paid with non-public funds, and there are some that are paid with public funds. We didn't differentiate that on the supplemental schedule, but there are some that are approved through the school system, and then there are some that are just extras that are paid by our boosters, which is why it's so important to bring those before you, so that you know what the boosters are actually paying for when it comes to those supplements.
And so are we reimbursing the Booster Club for what they've done?
We do not. We do not.
So
That
they-
is a choice that the Booster Club made to hire this individual to support the wrestlers.
And does this person, is she supervised by the superintendent? How does her employment work? Is she an employee of school system?
Some are employees, some are volunteers. So not all supplemental recipients would be an employee of Hoover City Schools. So where we might hire a coach, or we might hire someone outside to stay with our students, they may not be an employee of Hoover City Schools. So it may not be a classroom teacher, it may not be a full-time employee. It's either someone that's volunteering their time and the booster feels like they need to supplement them a little bit,
Okay.
honorarium, whatever you may want to
And
call
so the
it.
reason I'm asking this is, like, we're all volunteers. We had to fill out a bunch of paperwork before we sat down
Yes.
to do an interview. Does this person have to go through anything like that before they're exposed to our children?
Obviously, they're interviewed by the athletic director if it's an athletic supplement. If it's a school supplement, then they're interviewed by the principal, and then I'm sure there are other individuals that are part of that. As far as the paperwork that takes place here at the central office, we're still trying to tweak that a little bit. We found there are probably some little flaws that we need to tweak and maybe do more background checks, more in-depth background checks. So we're working through those procedures with Dr. Murphy and the HR department.
But let me say that I wanna make sure we bring to you all supplements on the front side of a year, rather than coming and having pieces after a person has performed a service, and obviously we're gonna pay them at that point. We wanna think a little bit more forward and make sure we have all of our supplements before you, even those that are gonna be paid by boosters, cause you ought to know that too.
So this time next year, the wrestlerettes, if they're budgeted, then the board's funds may pay for it.
No, that is not
So
correct.
that doesn't change the
That
fact
is
that
not
we're doing it
correct.
every year.
That is
Okay.
correct. All you're really saying is these individuals have been approved to receive a supplement, and we agree with the procedures that are being used.
Okay.
Now, the
And that was-
1920 supplemental schedule, I was hoping to have it today, but there were a couple things we figured out that we needed to do a little bit more research. So I hope to have that either at the May 22nd special called meeting, or we'll have it at the June if it's rescheduled. We'll have it at the June if it's rescheduled. So we'll have the 1920 supplemental schedule reviewed by you and approved, hopefully, and then it'll go into effect beginning October 1. Okay? So it's still well, it's a school year. I take that back. It would go into effect August with those fall sports.
And we do want to stop any supplements that are given just as an amount of money. It has to be based on service, it has to be based on a schedule of years of service, as all are. We can't have any outliers to that process.
And what I'll try to do too, since you have those questions, I'll try to designate on the schedule whether it's district funds, whether it's local school funds, or whether it's booster funds, if you think that would be more helpful too. And then we can have that. I can do that.
So as for what you presented to us tonight,
Yes.
Ms. McKay,
Yes,
these funds are paid by private parents of our students
that is correct.
into a booster club, and none of this supplement touches our budget.
That is correct. That is correct. It touched the individual booster club's budget. So they budgeted those funds, they raised those funds so that they could then turn around and pay this individual. They pay the school, the district, and then we go ahead, we receipt it, and then we cut them a check. So those funds have already been received. In fact, I'm holding the check until you say it's okay.
Yeah. And I guess one of the questions I have is that since the money is kind of coming through the district, I mean, the district doesn't really have a role in choosing this person. Most jobs that people hold here, that they have to be, there's an HR component to it. That's what I'm getting to. Is there an HR component to this?
There is still,
Okay.
yes. Anyone that's working with our children, obviously, we have to go through some type of background check. We have to have their documentation. They have to show their years of service. So it's just like any other employee that's coming for a full-time job or a part-time job. They still have to go through the payroll, the HR piece.
Gotcha.
So
Alright.
yes. Any questions about the supplemental? Okay. So I think next, let's just jump to the summer paint bid, if that's okay. So we're presenting to you something that's a little bit different. It's a little bit, very thoughtful in how we did this. This summer paint bid is actually not based on the low bidder performance. So we call this a performance bid. And what we're doing is we gave the vendor the amount of money and we said, how much can you do for this amount of money? The opposite is we're gonna say, this is the work that we need performed, how much is it going to cost? And we take the low bidder. So the individual company, or companies in this case, that said they could do the most work for the money that was allocated, they're the ones that were actually saying we'd like to award these projects to this particular company. So David was very instrumental in helping us with this. It was actually his thought that we do a performance bid rather than a low bidder based on what we wanted to do. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of the background and then I'll let him tell you a little bit about the details. So in our capital plan that was approved back last August and September, we said that we were gonna allocate $200,000 for painting. So we basically said $50,000 will be set aside for the paint and all of the supplies. We're buying that. So operations is going to put forth the $50,000. So all we're really trying to do is bid on the labor. So each elementary school was allocated $8,000. Each middle school was allocated $10,000, and each high school was allocated $15,000. A little bit of an increase from what we were able to do last year. So what we did, we went into the schools and we asked the principals, you've been given $8,000. We want you to tell us the areas that need the painting, and then we want you to prioritize those areas. So we had a worksheet. And these were the worksheets that they completed for us. And David, if you want to jump up there and talk a little bit about what we did. Once the principals prioritized for us what they wanted, and here's just two examples. One is a Green Valley example, and one is, I believe I use Simmons. Let me double check. I use Simmons. So they went in and they said, here are the locations that we need painted, and then here's how we prioritize those. And at that point, David jumped in and he went through the buildings with the vendors that were interested in this job. So David, if you want to jump in, please.
Yeah, with a performance-based bid difference there, real key difference is that you really need to spell the scope out very clearly so that everybody understands what needs to be painted, how we want it painted, and have a real clearly defined specification about what it gets painted with and who furnishes the paint and that sort of thing. So that everybody's all on the same page, which they were. And we had 7 bidders that indicated interest, and out of that, about 4 of them dropped out, and it's just a busy time right now. There's a lot of work out there, and it's kind of difficult to find people, but these that bid were very competitive, and you'll see that in the ranks of the way their bid showed up is very good spread of bids. They were very close, and I thought they did a very good job of just telling us how far they could go with each school. And those, as they go down the priority list, let's see, I guess,
I gave them Green Valley here.
okay, the Green Valley, okay, good, yeah. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, as you're looking at Green Valley, what you'll see is we've listed out the classrooms in order there of the way that the principal gave us the prioritization of that. She wanted her bathrooms done first, and then she wanted first, I don't know how she arrived at her sequence of this, but she gave the classroom, we just put down the classroom numbers there. And the painters would go through and they would tell us, I can get all the way down to, in this case, he got down to A13 he ran out of money of the $8,000 that was allotted for that school. And that's how that works. And you'll see that a very similar case, Simmons Middle is another one where they took it, and there were several of these that there were some changes within the scope, and you'll see one right there with the stairwell that was actually added in. It's maybe a little bit confusing because that was one of the contractors, and the way he added that in was a little different right there, but it worked out real well for us in terms of it matching up with everybody else's bid. They all came in very similar. So that's the gist of how this works, and we are at the present time getting a color schedule put together. The paint is already being ordered right now and set aside by Sherwin-Williams, and it will be stored in their warehouse, and then as they need it, they will be calling on us, and we'll be furnishing it to the job site with them. And for them to get paid, their pay application is almost the exact same thing. What we do is we put a prioritization here, and then out to the side we have a sign-off where our personnel will go to the job site as they complete each task on this painting order right here. He will sign off if it's completed to his satisfaction, and at that point then we send it in for payment. And so they can do it by school. They don't have to wait until they finish everything in there. They can do it when they finish up. Let's say Green Valley is finished, they can invoice for Green Valley, and then they move on to the next school. That way they keep money flowing for themselves, and it works out well for everybody, and it's a good way to work it. And we developed up a full set of plans and specs of all the schools with all the floors shown, and it was color coded as to which areas get basic paint, which get the accent walls and features that they wanted painted, and we put them all pretty intricately done, but it worked out well. They understood what we were after, and it was, nobody seemed to indicate any questions beyond the normal questions that we would normally get. Any questions from the board? That is,
I do have a question.
sure.
As far as the process of doing this, I sat in a session in Montgomery early this year where bid law was discussed exhaustively.
Oh, yeah.
Is there anything about the process of doing it this way that our lawyers sign off on to say that this is good and we're in compliance with Alabama's bid law?
And there's nothing that I'm aware of, because it's a competitive situation. Everybody has the same degree of competitiveness here. In other words, there's nobody given any advantage in any way. The bid law is there to protect from a disadvantage in that sense. So based on my experience, this has been done very frequently. It actually has been done through the federal government even. Where I first learned about it was the military. They were doing performance bids like that even in the military. So if there was a bid law situation, I would think you would probably hit it there.
I'm just curious about procedure.
Question.
Do we consult our lawyers when we do things a little differently than we normally do it? We are doing this one a little differently than before.
A little different. I have not in this particular case. It was just something I've seen done previously with government work.
And I'm not criticizing.
No, that's okay. I mean, no, it's a good question. But the bid laws as far as I know, I've never seen anything in there that says you can't do that.
And I actually reached out to the state examiners. I wanted to make sure that this would be considered a public work, so we were talking about the 50,000. Obviously, we knew it'd be over the 50,000. And the individual that I was talking to is actually an attorney. So we were able to sit down and kind of walk through what the procedures would be.
Very
And
good.
so I had their blessing, I suppose, to move forward.
Mr. Bogue, I have two questions. So, looking at Green Valley, all student bathrooms, including all stalls that were previously painted. So, have they just recently been painted? We're painting them again?
What came down to, in fact, I was kind of curious about when she wrote that out, as to what that meant. And we went out there on site and looked. What it was, they had actually had some prefabricated partitions, and for some reason they had painted them. I don't know why they did that. These were, but they just wanted them repainted. I don't know why they did that. That was very unusual, that they would be painting toilet partitions, but somebody.
But we're gonna now repaint them again?
Now you have to repaint them about every year. That's one of the problems with.
Oh, so we shouldn't have painted them in the first place, but now that
That's
they
what
have
I
been
would
painted,
say.
I'm with you.
Okay, and that's why that was noted that way. It was kind of a little bit unusual from that sense. It's the only school I've seen out of all of them, all 16.
And as far as the actual process, we also had a mandatory pre-bid. So anyone that was interested, they had to attend this mandatory pre-bid, and they actually had to walk through all of the facilities. So if they did not walk through the facility to see the areas that were being bid on, then they were not allowed to bid on that particular school or building. So,
And we had sign-in sheets that every time when we showed up there at a building, they had to sign the sign-in sheet. So if their name isn't on that sign-up sheet, then I can't accept a bid from them.
So all three companies did not bid on all of the buildings?
That is correct. The first day, all three companies were there. The second day, two of them were there, and then the third day there was only there were two. So those two stayed with us the whole way through, all 16 schools.
And so we say, they say to you, well, hey, I can do this for $8,000.
that's right.
That's basically what they
That's
say.
right. I can do these rates for that allocation. That's right.
And then
And then
once-
we awarded it based on the most work that could be done. So square footage, if you want to do it
Gotcha.
that way.
In other words, the number of boxes is what determines who wins the bid. We basically would look back, he got all the way down here to A13, well, the other guy, let's say he only got down to B20. Then he was the rightful winner of the bid. And so it was a very fair and very competitive range, and nobody had any comments.
And you talk about the contractor being able to get money regularly and continuously. Did you say that the principal approves the work, walks through and says, hey, this is
No,
good,
it'll be
this is.
our operations. We have a painter on our operations team, and he's the one who's gonna be the day-to-day contact. He'll be keeping up with them every day, and we're also gonna be coordinating with our maintenance staff and with their schedules. Each school has their own little independent schedules of activities. Everybody thinks school shut down in the summer, they don't. In fact, they're very active during the summer, so we keep up with what their schedules are predicating, and then we coordinate that also with their maintenance staff, because they typically like to empty the room into the hallway. Well, that's probably the worst thing for us in case we're painting the hallway, and that's a problem. So we have to coordinate all that.
I know we want to get to code of conduct, and so I just have one last question, and that is, so now we're tracking what rooms have been painted, and so we should have a layout of every school, which rooms have been painted, so that we know what that process looks like now going forward.
Well, pursuant to the board approving this tonight, I'm gonna issue a notice to proceed to the three contractors. They have not started, and they will start on May 29th. And they've given us a priority list of which schools they wanna start with first. And then I'm coordinating with those principals and with the maintenance staff of those. Right now, for example, one of them wants to start with Spain Park and Berry. And so
Let me ask the question differently. So once we approve this with the assumption it is, my
Mhm.
question is about how we track now going forward. So we should have a plan in place that allows us to know what we painted summer of 2019.
Oh, yeah.
So what are we doing summer 2020 and some sort of perpetuity plan
I
that
see what you're
allows
saying.
us to cover.
Yeah, the remaining balance of these that didn't get
So
painted
that's
could then
this,
become, if the principal so chooses, it could become the continuation.
Thank you.
Each year, that's a part of their needs and wishes when we do the walkthrough. So we'll just update that particular list and then they can reprioritize. Do you want me to do the financial statements next? Well, she said she needed 15, I'll try.
Okay, no. She knows how many she needs.
I'll go fast. No, it shouldn't take too long. So really what I wanted to do is tell you a little bit about the financial statements and what you need to look at and what some of those column headers mean, what some of the row headers mean. So if you'll just look first at the combined balance sheet, which is your exhibit F1A. So basically, this is your balance sheet. And we're gonna talk simple terms, assets equal liabilities plus fund balance. And remember, the fund balance is your savings account.
Which used to be known as cash reserve, right?
Pardon?
We refer to that as cash reserve.
Some people can say it's reserves, yes. You can. A
What
lot of
page?
different words that can be used. If you go to exhibit F1A, I don't know if she puts pages on there, I'm so sorry. Page numbers.
101, F1, yeah, just page 101 behind the business actions.
Okay.
Oh, yes, don't look at your don't look at your audited financial statements, I'm so sorry, guys. No, those are audited financial statements, we're
I was
just
like,
looking at your packet.
Got it. Go ahead.
So F1A, the general column header, that includes your state and local dollars, which also includes your local school public funds. So that's typically all of your operating transactions. Your special revenue column, that's restricted, so that's for specific purposes. Your federal funds, Title I, Title II, Title III, special education, career tech. It's also your CNP, right? That's what falls under special revenue. Again, it's restricted. You can only use it for a certain purpose. The debt service is your long-term debt, and that's really only your principal and interest payments. Your capital projects, that's really exactly what it says, capital projects plus any buses. So when we talk about fleet renewal, that falls under your capital projects. So this year we had a few new buses, we had RC3, and we have the band room. Proprietary, that's really fee supported. We don't have anything like that anymore. We may have summer school. That used to be when we had extended day. So when we used to charge a fee for our after-school care program, that would have fallen under that proprietary enterprise. Then you have your fiduciary column. That's assets held as a trustee. So we're providing stewardship. That's your non-public PTO. That's your non-public booster clubs. That's what falls under the trust or agency. And then the account groups, that FA and LT department, that's really just something that's internal. It's usually used by the auditors. We really don't use that because it doesn't report operations. It's just a list of your accumulated costs and your values. So it really is something that you'll really see more in the financial statements and the notes when it talks about the value of your fixed assets. How much do you have in vehicles? How much do you have in land and buildings, et cetera? Let's see. If you look at the far left, when you see that other debits, you may wonder, well, what is other debits and what's amounts available? That's the amount of assets available for the retirement of your long-term debt. And that's why you'll see it over there at the far end. Again, it really isn't anything that necessarily flows through the books. It's more informational for auditors and your financial statements for your bondholders and stakeholders. And then amounts to be provided, that's to liquidate your long-term debt. So really, it's more informational, not very helpful, but we have to put it on there. That's just a part of our standards. Then remember liabilities. That's the amount that you owe. Claims payable is really just accounts payable. Interfund payable, that's what we're paying from one fund within our books to another fund. It's just an internal transfer. And then you have your other liabilities. That's where the bulk of it is. That's your accounts payable. That's your salaries and benefits payable. That's your deferred revenue. And then down at the bottom, your fund equity, you have your reserves fund balance, that's what's restricted. You have to use that in a specific way. And then you have your unreserved fund balance, that's unrestricted. So that's your balance sheet that we talk about. Then if you go to F2A, I'm gonna call that your income statement. That's income less expenses equals your profit or loss. That profit or loss is what impacts your savings, or what we call fund balance, or the reserve. So again, it's the same thing. You've got your same column headers, your general, your special revenue, debt service, capital projects, expendable trust. What I wanted to point out here was the revenues. If you look at the state resources, it shows the $253,000. Really, the only thing there is the money that we're getting monthly from the state for fleet renewal. We have not received our allocation for capital outlay. Typically, there's 2 payments from the state for capital outlay. Last year it was April. We're already into May, so I'm hoping it's coming soon. And then the other one is always in September. So that's why you only see the $253,000 there. Auxiliary services, if you go all the way back over to the far left, just know that auxiliary services, that includes transportation and CNP, your child nutrition. Sometimes people don't know what auxiliary services mean, so I just want to say transportation and CNP. Again, your debt service, if you look over under the debt service column, it shows $8.3 million. In February, we paid principal and interest. We have one more payment that we'll make in August, and that's interest only. And then again, when you get down to other fund sources, that's basically miscellaneous transactions that aren't recorded as revenue or expenditures. It's really, again, just in-house transfers. So when you look at other fund sources, that's money coming in. That's what we receive from local schools to cover our payroll and to pay for transportation when they do field trips. And then your other fund uses, that's money that we pay out to the schools. That's typically just your discretionary money. When we give the schools their discretionary allocation in October to use as they see necessary in their buildings for the school year.
Could you give us a cheat sheet of all this?
I can make copies of this if you want, and then you can just keep it in your binders from month to month. It has all the notes. Does that help? Would that help? Okay. Some people learn differently, so I couldn't decide whether I wanted to just give you the copies or whether it was easier. Sometimes I learn more if I write it down, and I didn't know how many of you might want to write things down on your sheets. So then you get to the combined statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. That's your F3A. And basically that's just comparing your budget to your actual. So I guess the only thing I really want to point out here is under general, if you look at state sources, it really is 50%, and that's where we're supposed to be because we've been through 6 months out of the year. That's normal. We expect that because the state gives us 1/12 of our allocation, so we should be at 50%. But if you look down at your local sources, we're actually over what we had budgeted. That again is a very good sign. But that's when I always tell you at every one of these meetings, remember, we get all of those collections up front. They come earlier in the year, so you're not going to see a lot of increase as we go through the rest of the year. So where that comes all in up front, the state allocation is really divided over 12 months. Let's see. And then if you look under special revenue for federal sources, the only thing I really want to say there and just bring your attention to is basically what happens here, we spend it in the month of March. In April, I request reimbursement for those expenditures, and then we don't get the money until May. So we spend it in March, I request the money in April, and then we get the money in May, which is why we have to keep those books open in October because we're playing in September and the new year. That's really all I wanted you to see on that page. The next page is you'll flip over to the F3B. Let me see what I'm looking out here. Again, principal and interest was paid in February. That's what shows up under debt service actual. Under capital projects actual, we have the $470,000 that's for buses. And then you have the $4.7 million that was for the band room and the RC3. Again, we still have payments to be made on RC3. We just have the final payment for the band room. F3C. That is, I guess really all I want to show you on this one is under the total government and fund types budget column. If you look down at the very bottom where it says beginning fund balance October 1, again, just looking under that total column, it shows $118 million. That was our actual ending FY18. That's what the auditors are gonna talk about in this financial statements. Okay, so that was September 30, 2018. That 103 million, I just wanna point out to you, remember the original budget for the ending reserve was going to be 109. But we had to adjust it for the actual ending FY18, which was that 2.7 million. And then we added 3.1 million with the budget amendment because of RC3 bid going up and the difference in the architect fee. So the amended FY19 comes back to that 103. That's why it shows the 103. And I'm almost finished. That monthly management report, y'all actually hate that report, and I don't think it's helpful at all. So with your permission, I'd like to just discard that from all future packets, if you're in agreement. I think there are other reports that are out there that are much more helpful. I do some of this on the dashboard for you already. So I think this is a very difficult report to read, and I think I can give it to you in a different format that might be easier to read and interpret. It may not be next month, if you'll give me some time to figure out how I want to do that. But with your permission, I'd like to eliminate that from your packet. And then the cash disbursements report, I'll say it in the narrative, but just to point out, that $898,000 that's at the top, that is our fund transfer. So the board pays for CNP salary and benefits, and we pay all the payables because CNP has their own account. And then the CNP department reimburses us for all of that. So what you see there is what we've paid. Next month, they'll actually pay us back. The capital projects, again, was all RC3 for the month of March. And then the technology, that's a little bit high, but that's because we did the desktop refresh at the elementary schools, and we bought all the desktops for RC3. So that's why you see that increase this month in technology. And then your dashboard is just a summary, basically, of the balance sheet and the income statement. And we just focus on your general fund because that's your local and your state money. And we do the special revenue because that's your federal money. So that's why we picked those two, if you're wondering why the others aren't included. Any questions?
I have a question, not quite, and thank you, this is
Okay.
great. I'm still trying to understand, when we send in our 10 mil match to the state, which
Yes.
is required, when we
Yes.
get the money back, we don't get it back. So what are they doing? They're taking the 10 mil match from all the districts, sending it down there, dividing it by 750. So we're contributing to a lot of other school districts that doesn't come back to us. Now, would you require, I should be asking you.
No, it's okay. I mean,
I'm just trying to make sure I understand, which I learned every year. So we send 10 meals, which we know what a meal's worth in heaven. We send to the state by law.
yes.
The state gets that. They kind of want to say, but you get it back, but you don't, because then we're contributing to the districts that are less fortunate, so we get less money back.
That's
So,
right.
I think I got it.
Okay.
Took me 2 years. I couldn't figure out where we were losing the money.
Yes, ma'am.
I emailed a copy last night. We had a committee of 17 people that worked on the code of conduct. Up here, you have listed, it ranged from teachers to counselors to assistant principals to principals, parents, and also Dr. Lamar, the director of equity. So we had several meetings where we looked at what needed to be changed with the code of conduct. The first thing would be resets, and this is part of PBIS. So in the past, the resets were categorized kindergarten through 5th grade. We proposed changing that to K through 2, and then 3 through 5. Now, a reset would be if I get a class, if a student gets 7 class 1 offenses, it can result in a class 2 offense. If students get, so we're proposing that K through 2, the reset would change from 25 days to 10 consecutive days. And then for 3 through 5, change from 25 days to 20 consecutive days. We also propose that the reset for Crossroads changes to 2 years. So typically if a student is assigned to Crossroads, it's 45 days first assignment,
second assignment would be 90, third would be 180. This would be if I get assigned to Crossroads in ninth grade and I get 45 days, but then I get assigned in 12th grade, rather than being 90 days, it would be 45 days. Does that make sense with the resets? We will propose adding restorative justice as a possible disposition for class 2 offenses. PBIS will train administrators on restorative justice on May the 25th. Restorative justice would be circles, restorative circles to talk about, or a project that students would be able to do based on discipline issues. On Crossroads Appeal, the only thing that we've added, we've actually broken down the steps to make it a little bit easier for parents, but we added the statement that ordinarily no attorneys would be present in an advisory capacity at appeal. However, if a parent chooses to have an attorney, the school district would need a 48-hour notice. And with expulsions, again, it's actually broken down into steps, but the thing that's been added this year would be number 2, where once a principal recommends that a student be expelled, then the superintendent or her designee has 3 options. Actually, to hold an appeal hearing with the student, to review the information that the principal has submitted to submit the recommendation to the board, or any other deemed necessary based on the determination. Does that make sense? Rather than having a meeting with the superintendent and then with the board, there are 3 different options. And then the board would be the one to hear any recommendation for an expulsion and to make the final decision. For K through 5, in the past, the code of conduct for all infractions and dispositions has been K through 12. The proposal is to actually have a K through 5 section and then a 6 through 12. So for the K through 5 section, we define defiance as, and the definition for defiance would be the same for K through 12, but it's deemed as confrontational or derogatory responses or non-compliant responses to the directive given by an adult, or refusing to follow a reasonable request by a Hoover City Schools employee. For elementary, the amount of theft has been removed, whereas in the past, 100 or less would be a class 2, 100 or more would be a class 3. For elementary theft, it's just a class 2. And then we added to prohibited items counterfeit money. What we've done for elementary is added out-of-school suspension as a possible disposition when a student has a class 3 offense. For instance, a first or second grader might bring a pocket gun to school accidentally, but that, or a knife, not a pocket knife. Thank you for correcting me. A pocket knife. So that would give the option for out-of-school suspension for kindergarten, 1st through 5th grade. We've added dispositions for K through 5, so there'll be consistency when students get in trouble in the bus. We will be working the rest of this week to do the same for 6 through 12, and we'll have that for you at the June board meeting. Infractions that were amended for K through 12, I talked about defiance. We added a definition. For 2.08, the use of tobacco, we've added CBD products. Theft, we've changed the amount. We've increased it from 100 to the value less than 250. And then we added a infraction for parking violations. And also we've added 3.36, any substance with alcohol content. That's a new disposition that has been added. For 3.05, we added that theft would be any amount exceeding 250 rather than 100. For 3.10, possession or use of prohibited objects, we added mace or any type of tactical spray. We've also added 3.35 as a new infraction code, conduct that disrupts the school environment. And I won't read the entire unless you want me to.
I think we should. I
Okay.
think it's important.
Okay,
Do you want to?
I do. And 3.35, conduct that disrupts the school environment. Conduct, including language, that has a purpose or effect that could be reasonably perceived as having the purpose or effect of disparaging, insulting, degrading, and demeaning any person or class of persons based on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, disability, gender, sexual orientation, or any other trait or characteristic that enjoys protection from discrimination or harassment as a matter of law or board policy, including but not limited to email, social media postings, or any other form of communication that creates or substantially contributes to disruption in a school setting, whether or not it takes place on school property or at a school-related event, or whether or not it was intended as a private communication or for a limited audience.
I will share with you, board members, that our attorneys helped draft this language. This has been shared with Department of Justice and Legal Defense. I don't think we've gotten response back, but it is under review by those two plaintiffs also.
Dr. Murphy, I know that, Dr. Simmons, I know that last year maybe, I know the University of Alabama was in the process of doing some evaluation of our student code of conduct. Has that committee or that group, did they have input into what you're putting before us right now?
I've emailed that to Dr. McDaniel, and she and I have been communicating back and forth today.
That is a positive behavior support intervention, folks.
And it's, I know LDF and DOJ will have something to say about 6-12. What about the remaining amendments to our code of conduct? Will they weigh in on any of that, or?
We had that conversation this morning with Ms. McKee, who's in the office with Johnson, Colvin, that group. And we're open. We've been available to review our code of conduct when it's convenient for the parties. And so if there are adjustments that they make now, we're open. If there is occasion where we agree to changes and we need to come forward at a later date, we're prepared for that. We do know that there'll be a complete read of our code of conduct and fully anticipate recommendations to come from the parties when they read that. And we'll need to at the table and reach agreements as to what that looks like, and then have our board's approval as it relates to any adjustments to the code of conduct. But we're ready for a thorough read. We're ready to sit down with them and do a complete review.
For class 3, the disposition that students could be prohibited from attending school organized activities such as graduation has been added for class 3. Dress code, what you see highlighted in yellow is what's been added to the current statements, so that students, if they wear spaghetti straps, that they have to have the proper garments underneath the spaghetti straps. We've added that yoga pants, all of that, the shirt or the skirt has to cover the student's hips and bottom. The pajamas or yoga pants or leisure pants, as pajamas are called now, are not allowed. And that leggings, if a student's legs cannot be exposed any higher than the tip of the student's fingers while their arms are resting at their sides. And also we added visor because it's hard to identify students on the cameras if their face is hidden. For attendance, we've added what a doctor's note is. So 1I through 6 specifies what would constitute a doctor's note that we would accept. And Dr. Lowry worked on all of this with principals.
And there is a new wrinkle in this process, and it's called the teledoc process. So one school district's already sent out and said, hey, how are you addressing the teledoc process? And it hasn't happened to us yet, but as that becomes more popular, we'll have to look at and see how we accept and adjust to that new approach to medicine.
Just on this part, on this policy right here, I can't speak to my other board members, but I did get a few calls. Luckily, our basketball teams go deep into championships and go deep into playoffs. Some parents can't have adequate child care for their younger siblings or people on those teams. And they end up accumulating absences for the younger siblings that run them, up to some of these non-excused absences. As the principals and Mr. Lowry and whoever looked at this, was any of that taken into account?
Not Not to my knowledge. I mean, we let every child's attendance stand on its own, and I realize that some parents may pull their children out for that, but it is the non-excused absences. One of the things that we're up against is that the state now gives us that report card,
Right.
and we've got to keep ourselves confined on those attendance issues, or we exceed, and then our report cards start to look really naughty. And it's an instructional day, and we want as many as we can in the buildings, of course, for instruction. But I understand how that does impact some families.
Dr. Lowry also worked with principals and presented to the PBIS committee about defining tardies. That was added to the policy as far as how we define a tardy for elementary and middle and high school. Crossroads, what you see highlighted in yellow has been added, that if students are assigned to Crossroads and they're in co-op, then they will complete the number of hours that they complete at their school at Crossroads. For instance, if I leave 2 hours early for co-op, then while I'm assigned to Crossroads, I can leave 2 hours early. And the last thing that I'll discuss is the Jamari Terrell Williams student bullying policy. This will also be proposed tonight as a policy revision, but the law requires that this be included in our student code of conduct. So what the law does is actually replace harassment with bullying. So our definitions have changed. And our policy has updated those definitions. Melissa McKee worked with us in a committee that looked at this. Cyberbullying has been added. And any bullying that occurs off or on school that interferes with the orderly operation of the school may be investigated by the school. That's part of the law. The committee that worked on this, the law defines the characteristics of individuals that are bullied. The committee came together and from that list wanted to add social economics. But students can still identify other areas that they're being bullied in. The policy requires that we have a board-approved reporting form, and this is the form that's been approved by, reviewed by Melissa McKee and the committee. If you notice, one thing that's required is that there has to be a way for students to report if there was a threat of suicide. So if you see the highlighted yellow there, that's been added to the form, but that will be up for the board to approve at the June meeting, but to review in May. Those are the main changes to the student code of conduct. Any questions or comments?
Certainly, board members, as you know, certainly as you review and study, that's why we have a month, because I'm anticipating you'll have thoughts and questions that you'll push to Dr. Simmons, that you'll push out to us, and that we're happy to be responsive to those. We just really wanted to get some of those changes in front of you. Okay? Thanks, Dr. Simmons. Board members, those were the things that we wanted to get before you, and I know you might want to take a quick break before we hit 5:30.
Thank you.
We'll convene a regular meeting at about 5:30.
Hey, how are you?